Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Janmadhyasya Yato Anvayaditaratascha Artheshu Abhignaswarat Tene Brahma Hridaya Adikavaye Muhyanti Yatsurayah Tejo Vari Mridam Yatha Vinimayo Yatra Trisargo Mrisha Dhamna Swena Sada Nirastakuhakam Satyam Param Dhimahi Nigamakalpataror Galitam Phalam Shukamukad Amrutadrava Sanyutam Pibata Bhagavatam Rasamalayam Muhuraho Rasika Bhuvi Bhavukaha. We now enter the 11th Skandha of Bhagavatam. We have completed the 10th Skandha, the longest and the sweetest Skandha of all the pastimes of Krishna. In the 10th Skandha got completed, and now 11th and 12th Skandha remain. So, Shuka Brahmam begins the 11th Skandha by summarizing the rest of Krishna's pastimes until he departs earth, and it will be expanded as we go further. So, in summary, he states to Parikshit, with the help of Balaram and the Yadavas, Krishna destroyed all the demons, and also through the Pandavas, he relieved the burden of earth by creating a violent discord battle between the Pandavas and the Kauravas. So, this is the whole Mahabharat war that is mentioned very briefly in Bhagavatam, because Mahabharat is described in detail in the other Itihasa. So, what we have seen various incidents of Mahabharata referred to. The last we saw was the Rajasuya sacrifice which Yudhishthira did in Indraprastha, which is the present day Delhi. And we saw that for this great Rajasuya sacrifice, Krishna was invited as the special guest of honor, and that is where Shishupala was also killed for his transgressions. And then after the grand yajna was over, everybody stayed on for some time, and during that time Duryodhana was also there, and he was humiliated because he was first of all burning with envy at the opulence of Indraprastha and the glorification of Yudhishthira by everyone. And on top of that, the palace was built so beautifully by the mystical demon Maya that he mistook water for solid surface and solid surface for water and fell down, and everybody laughed, and Krishna in a subtle way encouraged it, because even though it was not appropriate as Yudhishthira felt, it was necessary for the sequence of events to happen, and because of that humiliation his envy became even more so. And then later he invites Yudhishthira for a gambling match in which Yudhishthira is defeated by foul way. So it says here in the next verse, Krishna makes Pandavas his instrument because the Pandavas' anger was provoked by the Kauravas through deceitful gambling, humiliating insult, dragging Draupadi by the hair, and in many ways, and thereby the Lord caused the destruction of all the kings on both sides and relieved the earth of her burden. So what happened was, there was a gambling match for which the Pandavas were invited, and the gambling match was won by deceit by Kauravas with the help of their uncle Shakuni. And in this gambling match, Yudhishthira was made to bet everything, including his kingdom and themselves and the wife Draupadi. And when Draupadi was lost, they humiliated by dragging Draupadi by the hair. It was done by Dushasan, the brother of Duryodhan, and brought to the court, and in front of everyone, they further wanted to humiliate Draupadi by trying to disrobe her. And it is when Draupadi prays to Krishna, she completely surrenders to Krishna, and Krishna offers her unlimited amount of clothing so that they are not able to disrobe her. The more they disrobe her, the more clothing keeps on coming, and finally they get tired and they give up. So After all this happens, the Pandavas are banished to the forest, and then they come back as promised. And when they come back, and they were originally told that they will be given half the kingdom, but instead, again, Duryodhana goes back on his word and refuses to give anything. And that's when they first send Krishna himself as their messenger, and Duryodhana ignores that too. And after that, when all options are exhausted, the war is launched. And in this war, Krishna himself is the charioteer for Arjuna, and Duryodhan also comes to Krishna, but he gets the army. And then the big war happens, and in this war, everyone is killed on both sides except a handful of warriors, the five Pandavas, and just a few other handful of warriors. So, in this way, the whole burden of earth was removed. So, all these incidents were actually orchestrated by Krishna. So, even though it was Duryodhana who, due to his arrogance, seemingly caused the war to happen, it was all orchestrated in such a way because the purpose of Krishna's avatar is to remove the wicked and to reduce the burden of earth. So, Duryodhana, despite given many chances, never listened, and he only insulted more and more the Pandavas, resulting inevitably in this war, which caused the massive level of destruction. So that's what happened with the Mahabharata war, and Krishna orchestrated the whole war, and very famously, as well known, he also gave the Bhagavad Gita on the battlefield, where he in fact shows Arjuna that even before the war has begun, that all the warriors are killed. He shows this divine vision, Vishwarupa, where all the warriors enter Krishna's mouth, and then he tells Arjuna, you are simply an instrument, and therefore go ahead and fight because that's your duty, and thereby Arjuna fights and wins the war. So after this, Shuka Brahma Rishi proceeds and says, having annihilated all the kings and the armies with the help of Pandavas and then the Yadavas, Krishna thought to himself, now I have removed the burden of earth mostly, but I cannot say that it's completely done as long as the Yadavas remain, because the Yadavas are very vast in number. The Pandava army was also killed. Only the five Pandavas and Parikshit, who was in the womb of Uttara, and a few handful of warriors such as Ashwatthama, only a few survived, and everybody else was killed in that war. But the Yadavas were not affected. So Krishna tells himself that Yadavas are unconquerable because they are constantly in my protection and they are so prosperous, and therefore nobody can defeat them, nobody can vanquish them. The only way they will perish is like how bamboos perish by having friction with each other. So in the forest, bamboos many times are destroyed due to a fire where one bamboo stick rubs another, and through the friction there is fire that burns all the bamboo trees. So in a similar way, Krishna says the Yadavas will die only through friction among themselves. So he orchestrates that. So he orchestrates in such a way that his entire race of Yadavas too are annihilated through the curse of Brahmanas as a pretext. And then after that, Shuka Brahma Rishi concludes by saying that having completed all his pastimes, having spent time on earth, whereby everyone was attracted by his form, by his sweet words, and by the sight of his footprints, and by worshipping him, and his fame having spread all over the world, so that it is remembered through verses and songs and chants till now, and thereby giving the way for humans for all of time to come, the glory of his name, form, pastimes, and holy abodes. Having blessed with all of that, Krishna decides to leave the earthly realm and go back to the eternal abode. So this is how Shuka Brahma Rishi summarizes the rest of Krishna's pastimes. Of course, Parikshit again wants more details. So Parikshit asks Shuka Brahma Rishi, what is this curse of Brahmanas you're talking about? Because the Yadavas are a very devoted people. They are the associates of Krishna after all. They always serve the elders. They are very humble and devoted. So, what is it that's possibly the reason why they were cursed by the Brahmanas, and how did they perish? So, now Shuka Brahma Rishi replies and says that Krishna, having exhibited the most glorious form, which is full of grace and performing all auspicious actions, lived in the city of Dwaraka for a long time, establishing his fame. And then, when he decided to destroy his race, the Yadavas, because that's the only work left in his Leela before he leaves earth, therefore, he decides so. And then, with this decision made, he was residing in Dwaraka, having performed all auspicious deeds that bring holiness and destroy the sins of everyone who remembers them. He was simply preparing for this last Leela while residing with Vasudeva, his father, and then he finally bids farewell to all the sages. The great sages come: Vishwamitra, Asita, Kanva, Durvasa, Bhrigu, Angira, Kashyapa, Vamadeva, Atri, Narada, Vasishtha. All of them come, and he sends all these sages to a holy place near Dwaraka. So after he sends them there, Krishna also retires, and it is said that the Yadavas, they, because of Krishna's Leela again, they got into their head to make fun of the sages. So all the sages who were there, who had retired to a place near Dwaraka, these Yadavas went there along with Krishna's own son Samba. And this Samba, they dressed him like a woman who is pregnant, and with mock humility, they went and fell at the feet of the sages. So these Yadavas behaved in a very disrespectful way, very inappropriately with the sages. So they dressed Samba, the son of Krishna, like a woman who is pregnant. And then they all went and, with mock humility, bowed down to the sages and said, "Oh, great sages, your vision is so unfailing. Look at this pregnant woman. She's about to give birth to a child, and she desires to have a son, but she wants to know whether she'll have a son or a daughter. She's so shy to ask you directly." So they are basically making fun of the sages because this is a man dressed as a woman, and they are saying this woman is pregnant, and what kind of child will this pregnant lady have, quote unquote. So the sages, of course, know that these Yadavas have lost their mind, and they are aware that all of this is part of divine Leela. So they, to fulfill the Leela, tell that this woman will give birth to an iron pestle that will destroy your race. So they curse like this. So now, having heard this, these people are terrified. They were making fun, thinking that they will simply laugh at the sages when they say a child will be born as a son or a daughter, knowing that it's only a fake pregnancy, and therefore they wanted to expose the sages as not having divine vision. So, this is the kind of disrespect they had. But the sages had perfect divine vision, and therefore they knew it's a fake pregnancy, and they were making fun. So, the sages gave them this curse that she'll give birth to a pestle, an iron pestle that will destroy your race. So, when they heard this, they were terrified, and then they opened this fake belly of Samba and found exactly an iron pestle there. So now they were terrified, and they returned to the palace very worried. With sad and pale faces, they entered the court where the king Ugrasena was there, who is the grand uncle of Krishna, as we have seen. And this Ugrasena sees this, and they all tell what happened, that we made a big mistake. We played with the sages and they have given us this curse, and because of that, there is this pestle which they have told will kill all the inhabitants of Dwaraka. We don't know what to do. So Ugrasena says, okay, let's crush this pestle to powder and throw it into the sea. So they crush it into powder, and they go and dissolve in the sea. But there are some pieces that are whole; those also fall into the sea, which are not powdered, and mostly it's powdered. And it is said that the whole piece that was remaining, it was swallowed by a fish, whereas the powder was all taken by waves, the iron pestle powder, and the powder was deposited on the shore where they grew as a grass called iraka. So it's a special kind of grass. And meanwhile, the fish that had swallowed the iron piece was caught by a fisherman, and the fisherman cut open the fish, found this iron piece, and he made an arrow out of it and gave it to a hunter. So this whole thing is now getting ready for the final Leela. So this arrow will play a very prominent role. The arrow that came from the fish's stomach, the iron piece from the fish's stomach that became an arrow, and then all the grass on the shore, all of this will play a very providential role in the ending of the whole Leela of Krishna along with the Yadavas. So this is all known to the Supreme Lord, to Krishna. So it says here that even though the Lord knew, and he could have stopped the curse, he could have nullified the curse of the sages, but he did not want to do that because he actually approved of it, being the destroyer. It says very beautifully. So the important thing to remember is Krishna is being the supreme being. He is the source of creation, sustenance, and dissolution. So when the time for destroying comes, that is also done by the same power of the Lord. Therefore it says, Bhagavan Nyata Sarvartha Ishwaropi Tadanyatha Kartum Naichad Viprashapam Kala Rupa Anvamodat. So being time itself, being the destroyer. So as Gita also, in Gita Krishna says, Kalosmi Aham, I am time that destroys everything. So here also it says that being time, being the very form of death, Krishna has decided to not nullify the sages of the curse of the sages, but instead let it become effective, because that's the vehicle through which his divine Leela will unfold in terms of finishing off the Yadus. So knowing the whole truth of what has happened, knowing the curse, he let it stand because he approved of it, being the destroyer. So this is how this chapter ends. Now Shuka Brahma Rishi will go on to narrate how all this came about in the rest of the 11th Skandha, which actually includes very wonderful teachings. Before these incidents unfold, there are some most wonderful teachings that come in 11th Skandha, which we will see from next chapter onward. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.